Hello, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we have the case of Blanche Monnier, and as you may have seen in the title, it's pretty disturbing. If you want to see more cases like this, if you want to see solved or unsolved cases, or a playlist of strange places, you can go straight to the eye that's on the screen. There you'll see a bunch of options, and you can also subscribe to this YouTube channel to know when I upload new videos. My social media links are below if you'd like to follow me, and without further ado, let's get started. Blanche Monnier was 25 years old when this story first took place. She lived in the historic French city of Poitiers with her aristocratic family. Blanche was a very attractive woman and belonged to the French aristocracy at the end of the 19th century. Her father had been the dean of the Faculty of Letters in Poitiers, and her brother, in addition to being involved in several societies and charitable works, had served as the sub-prefect of Poitiers. In 1876, Blanche met the man she believed was the love of her life. He was a lawyer older than her, but he was living in poverty. Blanche wanted to marry him. The problem was that her mother did not approve. A man whom Louise described as someone without a penny to his name was not suitable for a young woman of the aristocracy. And one day, Blanche disappeared without a trace. Her parents made up all kinds of excuses to avoid the neighbors' questions, who were clearly worried about what was going on. They didn't want to stop the rumors that she had left, and eventually, they just decided to let people forget their daughter ever existed. The young woman had simply vanished. Sometime later, Blanche's mother started giving explanations to those who kept asking, obviously concerned. She said that Blanche had gone insane, that she had a mental illness, but that they didn't want to commit her to a psychiatric hospital. Instead, according to her, Blanche was at the family home, with all her needs being taken care of. The reality, however, was something else entirely, very different. At one point, a voice could be heard coming from one of the windows of the house. A neighbor of the family started trying to pay attention to what that voice was saying. She said that they had locked her up for no reason. She was worried and also wondered how she would get out of that place. So, finding the situation strange, this neighbor goes up to the door of the house and asks Louise whose voice it was. She told her it was her daughter and that her mental state had deteriorated so much that she was imagining things, like being a prisoner. Shortly after, the window was completely shut, so that no one could hear Blanche complaining again. In 1885, the man Blanche wanted to marry died. By then, Blanche's mother, Louise, was mourning the terrible death of her daughter, who apparently had died due to her mental state. At least, that's what she told everyone. But everything changed on May 23, 1901, 25 years after Blanche's disappearance, when a prosecutor in Paris received a letter with chilling details that were almost too hard to believe. The letter was anonymous, unsigned, and did not say how the sender knew these details, but it stated the following. Mr. Attorney General, I have the honor of informing you of a matter of exceptional gravity. It concerns a young woman who is locked up in Madame Monnier's house, deprived of food, who has lived on rotting garbage for the past 25 years, that is, on her own waste. In fact, this letter had been written by one of the household maids, a new girl who had recently arrived to replace the previous one. She arrived and saw the condition Blanche was in, where she was living, what was happening to her, the room where she was kept locked up, and decided to alert the authorities. For their part, the Monnier family enjoyed an excellent reputation. Louise Monnier, Blanche's mother, was already a widow. She was 75 years old, and thanks to her work in the city, she had received an award from the Committee of Good Deeds. Next to the mother's house lived her brother Marcel, who was also considered an active and valuable member of society. Skeptical about this accusation, the prosecutor decided to send the central commissioner, a man named Bouchetin. This man would be in charge of investigating the matter, which they did not believe to be true. That same day, at 5 in the afternoon, Bouchetin, along with other investigators, went to the Monnier house in Poitiers. Although at first they didn't find anything unusual, Louise raised numerous objections when the investigators wanted to enter a room located on the second floor, in the attic. This room, by the way, was quite small, not a main one. However, by insisting, they managed to get in. As soon as they opened it, they began to notice a stench so foul that Bouchetin had to step back as the smell clung to his nose and throat. The room was incredibly dark, all the windows were shut, and it was impossible to tell exactly what was going on inside. Bouchetin walked over to a window facing the street, intending to open it to let some air in, but he couldn't. Both the windows and the shutters were locked shut with chains and padlocks. On top of them was a curtain that blocked out any ray of light. After trying several times, the commissioner finally managed to open the window and was at last able to see what was inside the room. In a corner of the room, sitting on a straw bed, there was a naked woman surrounded by excrement, insects, and scraps of food. This woman was Blanche. Bouchetin described her as a real human skeleton. She was so malnourished that, according to chronicles from that time, her thighs had shrunk to the size of a wrist, and she weighed only 24 kilos. According to witnesses, when they entered the room, a foul stench rose up. The sheets were fused to the mattress and were extremely dirty. There was a shapeless mass there. She was being held captive there, curled up and refusing to show her face. Blanche was unable to communicate. She had spent 25 years locked up in that place without seeing sunlight, eating scraps of food, and barely speaking to anyone. All of this, obviously, had left deep scars on her psyche. While they tried to dress her so they could take her to a hospital, she simply didn't respond the way a normal person would. She just screamed. Also, for a very long time, not a single person ever stayed with her for too long. So suddenly having so many people in her room only made the situation worse. During all that time, she had only seen her family and a few servants. Blanche's hair hadn't been cut during her entire captivity. Apparently, she couldn't even bathe. That's also why she was called the real-life Rapunzel. Her nails hadn't been cut during all that time either, and her hands looked like claws. Witnesses described that the woman lived in what seemed like a hell filled with leftover food, poultry bones, and meat. Her body was covered in a crust formed by dirt, and there were bugs everywhere. The neglect was so severe that she had worms over 4 centimeters long, lice, and cockroaches crawling on her body. The humidity in the room was so high that mold was growing inside. Because of her physical condition and extreme weakness, it was impossible for her to stand up. But with the help of the people who came to rescue her, Blanche managed to go down the stairs and was transported by ambulance to a medical center. On her body, aside from all this, there were no signs of wounds or bruises. Authorities immediately ordered the arrest of her relatives, Louise and Marcel. Once their crime was discovered and during questioning, Blanche's mother's health deteriorated, and on June 9th at 9:30, she passed away after suffering a heart attack. Before she died, Louise insisted that she loved Blanche so much that she would sacrifice herself for her, and she blamed her daughter's condition on the negligence of the servants, because, of course, it was entirely their fault for leaving her locked up for 25 years in what looked like a tower, with no contact for 25 years. Marcel was accused of being an accomplice in his sister's captivity, although he defended himself by saying that even when she was young, his sister showed signs of mental disturbance, which is why a guardian had been appointed for her. After this guardian died, he had insisted on taking his sister to a hospice, but his mother had prevented it. He said, "I can't be blamed for the crime of forced confinement. Besides, there was no crime of kidnapping, since many people had access to Blanche's room. They knew about it, they knew she was in that condition, and yet they left her there, so it was definitely still their fault." On top of all this, it's believed that the young woman had tried to escape because one of the panels on the door of the room where she was locked up had clearly been recently repaired. At the same time, various inscriptions could be read on the walls of the room, such as, "Freedom, freedom," or "There's a favorite in the house and it's not me. It's very sad to be forced to live and die in a dungeon." There were also pencil and ink drawings on the wall, decorations traced with arrows and crosses, which were emblems of suffering. Will I ever see freedom? Will I remain in a dungeon? These questions were on the walls of the room where Blanche had been locked up, which she had written before completely losing her sanity. So on May 26th, just 3 days after her rescue, a note was published in one of the most well-known newspapers of the time, referring to Blanche as the Poitiers prisoner. French society went crazy over this news. The theory quickly began to circulate that Blanche had been condemned for falling in love with a man who had no fortune. For this reason, to prevent the relationship, the young woman was locked away in her prison where she soon lost her sanity. The trial for Blanche's kidnapping and imprisonment began the following October, with countless witnesses taking part. Just during the preliminary investigation, the judge had received 160 testimonies from people who had had some connection with the Monnier family. There were neighbors who talked about the screams coming from the mansion, and others described Blanche before she was locked away. She was sweet, kind, refined, tall, and I never saw her do anything eccentric, said one of the people who had seen her. Several of the household staff claimed they had direct orders not to open the window of the room. When asked why they hadn't reported anything if they knew all this, everyone excused themselves by saying they were afraid of losing their jobs. One former employee even claimed that Blanche's madness was due to heartbreak and desperation. The doctors who examined Blanche and testified during the trial had very different opinions about her situation. While some considered her completely insane and claimed her madness dated back to her early puberty, others, on the contrary, insisted that not only was she sane, but also well cared for and reserved. During the trial, Marcel's defense attorney portrayed the brother as naive and a complete idiot. This was clearly a strategy to absolve him of blame. He also argued that Blanche was not a victim of violence or abuse. He said, "There isn't even confinement in the legal sense of the word, because the question is whether closing a door behind someone who has no intention of leaving constitutes the criminal act known as violence or assault." You can tell me whatever you want down in the comments, but honestly, I think that's the worst excuse of all. Although it was determined during the trial that Blanche's mother, who had already passed away, was responsible for her kidnapping and confinement, Marcel was considered an accomplice. Even if it was true that he had tried to take her to an asylum, when his mother refused, he accepted the situation and even visited his sister in the room where she had been locked up. He was fully aware of everything that was happening and still did nothing. Even after seeing her in that state, surrounded by filth, he still never complained again. Marcel was then sentenced to 15 months in prison. Once he finished his sentence, he spent his last years in a mansion in the Pyrenees until he died in 1913. After all this, Blanche was sent to a psychiatric hospital. Unfortunately, she never managed to recover and also died in 1913. So yeah, it's a pretty, not just disturbing, but also sad story. Very sad, because from the very beginning, her family locked her up. Regardless of whether she actually had any mental issues that needed treatment, they locked her up anyway. And not only that, it's not like the door was open and she could leave whenever she wanted. No, the windows were shut. They did that on purpose so no one would hear her speak. She was on the top floor, in a remote part of the house, in a tiny room, on a straw bed. They didn't even bathe her. This was clearly because of that whole thing about judging people in aristocratic circles. If you had someone with a mental illness, it was almost a crime, something horrible for them. Maybe. Even so, that doesn't change the fact that it was a completely dehumanizing act that ended badly for everyone. So, what did you think of this story? Have you ever heard of a case like this? Have you seen anything similar? Let me know down in the comments. And with nothing more to add, here are my Patreons and channel members. Thank you for supporting me through those platforms. So here you have a new video, and here's a recommended video. If you enjoyed this, you can subscribe to the channel by clicking right here on my face. Take care.